All right, I think we're ready to go with that, right? So everybody's present, everybody's ready. All right, call the meeting to order the Committee of the Whole Administration and Operations meeting of Monday, January 16th, which is also considered budget meeting number 1. There is nobody joining us on Zoom today. So as item number 2, are there any changes to the agenda? Does anyone have anything to add or delete from the agenda? See no changes. I need a move for approval of the agenda. Moved by Councillor Martel, seconded by Councillor Ward. All in favor? Carried. Number 3 is disclosure of pecuniary interest or the general nature thereof. Does anyone have any?
None by me.
That's how I disclose. I don't either. Before I move, yeah, when's appropriate? Is now or
Item 9.
item 9? Okay, so I'll go to number 4, business arising from previous committee of the whole meeting minutes. If there are any, does anyone have any business arising from those minutes? To hearing none, so to the clerk, those are approved at council. Do we have to do anything with those tonight, or is it just business arising?
Through the chair, they were approved at our previous council meeting. They're just for business arising. If anything was brought up.
Good, so we don't do anything. Good. So 5 is delegations and presentations, and that would be our 2023 pre-budget presentation a little bit later this year due to multiple factors, but here we go in January for something that we would have maybe normally done in October or late September, something like that. So I welcome the treasurer, Sean Nicholson, to bring that presentation forward. I will say this, we're going to have it as a discussion item afterwards for council. Obviously the treasurer is here, so if there are questions, you want us to wait until the presentation is completely done, or do you want folks to like kind of combining 6?
I don't mind if people ask questions during the like as it's up on the screen.
That way we don't go by it. That's I think after
That way you don't miss anything either.
Yeah. I think if I can steal in here for 1 second before you start your presentation, I just want to go back to my first year for the new members of council, and
Why are you looking at me?
I looked at those 2 first. This part I sat quietly through it all, never said a word, simply because there were a lot of things that when Ms. Stubbs spoke, I honestly didn't understand, and I found it confusing, and I was a little afraid to ask the question. So I want to encourage everyone to if there are questions, make sure that you fully understand it. In my opinion, this is probably the one of the most important things that we do as members of council. So feel free to to ask as many questions and no questions about it. So starting into it for me with that, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you, Chair. So just to give a bit of background on this presentation, as the chair mentioned, we would normally do this in the fall, so usually around October. It would give an insight as to what the year end might look like. It would give some insight to what changes in the tax levy might be coming, or how changes in the tax levy would affect all other factors of the operational and capital budget. So given that there was an election, obviously we couldn't really do this until now. So a lot of this was prepared before I actually got here. So with some of the questions that are in here, if you do have any questions, comments on how this presentation could be tailored a little bit differently or better, please let me know, and I'll make those changes for next year when I'm a little more up to speed on everything within the township. So if we go through this presentation, so when we talk, I think I get to it in the next slide, but I think right off the top, the difference between the tax rate and the tax levy. So it seems like the two are interchangeable, but the easiest way to remember this is just in a simple equation. So your assessment times the tax rate equals your tax levy. So the tax levy, whenever we're talking tax levy, that's what we're talking about, what we're wanting to bring in for money into the township. So if we're saying that we want to have, 6 million in tax levy revenue, then that means we want to ensure that we're receiving $6 million to fund all of our operations and our capital projects. How that would then be funneled back through a tax rate is once we decide on the levy, then we would just allocate based on assessment and property code. We would then assess that back to calculated tax rate that the taxpayer would see. So the two terms are related but not interchangeable. So think levy revenue, thinks tax rate is the amount that's times the assessment, the assessed value of the property. So just a way to keep things a little bit clear. So what we were looking here on this, if you go back one slide, yes, to this one, we were just looking at the tax levy or tax revenue distribution by tax class. So this is where we would get into allocating it lower to residential, commercial, industrial, farm. And I think it was through Chair Deputy Mayor Dillabaugh that had asked just after the election is what was the percentage of how much is residential, how much is commercial. So this slide kind of lines that out is we're 75.14% residential and the balance is farm, commercial, industrial, all that. So we've got about a 75-25 split, which is really good for a township of this size. So that growth in commercial has really helped offset the.
Did you have your hand up?
No,
Duly chaired to a treasurer. Can you give me the definition between commercial and industrial, please? I have a hard time following that. I have 145 properties that are commercial and I have 51 industrial.
Mhm.
Can you give me, like, is Giant Tiger commercial or industrial?
I would have to actually take that back and look at it. I don't think I can say that right off the top of my head with I would have to look at which properties are under which class.
Okay, I'd kind of like to know what
Sure.
we have in our township when people ask me this, I get that all the time. Why is our taxes going up when we have so much commercial revenue or commercial properties?
Okay.
So, thank you.
If I may, through the chair, like a good example would be Village Pantry, Little Sisters, Spencer City Bar and Grill.
Commercial?
Commercial.
Okay.
Ingredient.
Ingredion, Greenfield Global.
Industrial, Giant Tiger, industrial.
I am 95% sure that it's industrial.
Right, okay, that's what, okay, thank you.
industrial warehouse, but commercial at storefront.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct. Yes.
So when you say Giant Tiger, we're likely talking about the Giant Tiger warehouse.
Distribution. center.
So that would be industrial.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, sorry. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Sorry, so through the chair.
Yep.
So when you said the 75% is really good. So other rural areas it's higher than that on the residential percentage. Is that what you're saying?
It can be, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it really depends on, I think our township is uniquely situated with having assets like the port and Giant Tiger that add a lot of that to that commercial and industrial base.
That was good.
Thanks, man. Okay. So on the next slide, this was what I was talking about before, as far as the tax levy is the revenue that we'd like to take in as a township. And a 1% increase in the tax levy would be $62,668. So if we decide that we want to raise the levy by 5%, then it would be 62,668 times 5. And that's what we would expect to cover any shortfalls in revenue or capital funding. The tax rate would be determined by taking that tax levy and apportioning it over several tax classes, like you saw on the prior slide. The key thing to note in here is we are in a two-tier municipality. So we report up through United Counties of Leeds and Grenville. So when we for every dollar that we would send out in the form of a tax bill, 56% of that goes to the township, 31% we would remit to the county, and then 13 would be for education. So we collect the education in the county and the levies on behalf of the county, and then we add our own levy on top of that, and then that is what makes up the whole pie for that purpose.
So essentially, you're collecting very roughly $11 million. We're keeping 6.2 million of our to ourselves, and the rest gets distributed.
Yeah. And just as we've seen the preliminary budget from the JSC, and we have an idea of what's happening at a county level. So if the county were to raise their levy, and we don't follow suit in some sort of proportionate share, then this pie chart starts to change a little bit, as far as then there's less to the municipality and more is going to the county. So it's something that we have to take into consideration as a lower tier municipality is there are two-tier municipality, is we have to be concerned with what the county is doing as well.
Yeah, it'll certainly have an impact on our end.
Yes.
On our end percent, rate.
Yeah, because essentially we would like to just pass it through and keep the municipality whole.
Mhm.
Next slide, please. So I had a great discussion with the chair on this slide today. Is you can see over the last 10 years what the municipal tax rate has done for the county, and as you see, or for the township. So as you see, we've kind of come down, and it's kind of creeping back up, and it's now almost to the same point to where it was before. So the way that the chair, when we had our discussion, is really that's a symptom of growth. So you can look at all of that as with the growth of the Giant Tigers and everything else, all the new business that's happened has brought down that residential tax rate to bring it back to that 75-25 equilibrium, and now we're only starting to see it creep up. Now, the other side of that is if we were to say would have kept that flat, then everything that's kind of in that line, if you were to take that as a shaded area, is that would then be money that we would have now at our disposal. So and everything that I've seen from the county, from every other municipality, is they would have followed the same trajectory that we did. So we did nothing different than any other municipality would have done. So it's just something more for that long-term thinking is sometimes if the education rate does drop, if we know we've got something a few years down the road, we might not want to drop it. We might want to keep it flat and then put that money into reserves and then pull it out when we have to spend on a project.
Yeah, or in fairness, a tough year like this one.
Yeah. Thanks. Next slide, please. So this is basically from that very first slide. This is interpreting this in a different way as far as just the change for all the residential properties that had a decrease as that time went on. What does that look like now? So we've got a 2.32 percentage change. Now, what does that look like for municipal residential property owners? So you would look at an annual increase of about $54 or $4.54 a month. If we go with that 2.32, and that's certainly not a final number. That's something as we present go through the capital budget and also present the operating budget. That's where we'll see the effects of inflation, all the other things that are kind of going on, insurance. Then you'll see what we might have to do with that.
Through the chair, I mean, sorry, did we capture any anticipated, growth in number of residents and things like that in our CAM equations, or did we just keep it flat?
Yeah, because the assessment was flat for 2022, but we had 1.59% growth in just extra properties that have come onto the tax roll, then we'll see a bit of an increase from that as well. So we would factor all of that into our final calcs when we get them. And I know with these slides, there's a lot of data on here, and I don't want to lose the room. So I want to be very conscious of not overwhelming people with stuff, and I'm certainly willing to talk through anything offline for this. I just want to make sure that we have that we're not all burnt out by the time we get to the capital discussion. But if you look at sorry, next slide. If we were to look at the total change over 6 years per 100,000, the residential tax rate has gone up by $38 per 100,000, and a lot of that is just in 2022. If we were to look at this based on the prior 5, then it's much less. Next slide, please. So just the operating functions of the township. So we've got 6 areas. We've got the general government, which would be council and administration, protective services, which is fire, police, conservatory, animal control, building and bylaw, transportation services or public works, all of bridges and culverts, all those things, and also environmental services. So our storm sewer and urban drainage, our recreation and cultural services. So cemeteries falls under that, libraries, parks. We've obviously got the 2 arenas. We've got 3 pools, 3 canteens, including the one that's on the Legion. We've got our center in Johnstown, and then Ball Diamonds. And then we also have planning and economic development. So that's just our city, our municipal planning, and then whatever economic development activities we would like to engage in.
Just trying to think where the 3rd pool is.
Big pool.
We want the big deal. I was thinking it's big
Yeah.
pool like that, but anyways.
So it's picking up on it. So
That's right.
next slide.
Two large, one small.
Yeah. So when we look at OpEx or operating expenses, the main categories are salaries, professional development, mileage for people to travel to work, insurance, which is very variable these days, materials and supplies, which is hard to get and have delays incorporated into them, contract services, utilities. We also decide what we're going to transfer to our operating reserves, what we're going to contribute every year to that to ensure that we have sufficient funding, and then any principal and interest payments on debt, and then any other expense. Next slide, please. So one thing on this slide, there's a lot of information on here, but the one thing that I would like to really just point out is just the consumer price index increase. I've seen everything that's come back has been as high as 6%. For cost of living increases. When we do present the operation budget, I've priced in for all the labor 3%. But we decide, or I guess you decide as a council, what that cost of living or CPI is going to be for labor and all those things. The only exception obviously is union. That's by their bargaining agreement. So.
Just for 1 second. if I may.
Sure.
To the CAO, so there is a bylaw in place that for CPI. That for non-unionized employees that council would pick what the percentage would be based off of CPI.
Through the chair, there is a bylaw in place that references the OMERS year over year, November to November. As the starting point, but it still would be something that would need to be approved by council.
And so if that number isn't something that is something council wants to do, let's say it comes out at 12%. And council doesn't have an appetite to do that, council can override that suggestion and set it for whatever they choose.
Through the chair, council would certainly have the opportunity to set that. There, one thing that I would note with respect to OMERS, it is capped at a maximum of 6%. So
as we
it
can see
is capped at 6%. I believe that the overall CPI with respect to the OMERS was 6.5 or 6.7.
Yeah.
So, but it's been capped at 6%.
Okay, and so, and just one more thing, just for clarity for the group, I think, but by my recollection, I would look through this today. Nowhere could I find anywhere that we went against that and changed the number that was brought to us. If we had gone with staff recommendation, so. Am I correct in that thinking?
I would say typically that council has went with the OMERS cost of living adjustment in the past.
Through the chair to David Treasurer. When you say the cost of living, is that through there's an index that comes out, is there not, from the government every 3 months or something?
CPI, consumer price index.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know.
They're used interchangeably.
There are a few different CPI and the one that was decided on back in 2015, which was the non-union personnel policy, was to take the OMERS November.
Yep. For the benefit.
Yes.
Everyone
Yes.
around the table.
So just from a high level, if we were to go with 3%, the impact to the operating budget would be an increase of 47,000. The CUPE 1.75 would be a $19,000 add to the operating budget. WSIB premiums increased, but the overall impact is only about $2,500. Same with CPP employer and EI contribution rates; those go up every year. So, but it's not a big driver in the operational budget. Where we have decreases in the tax levy, again, no reassessment from MPACs is what I was talking about before. Projected growth is 1.59%, or 15.45 million, which 4.86 is farming. And estimated tax revenue at 2022 tax rates would be about 79,000. So a lot of this, the decrease would offset some of the increases here in that operating budget. This doesn't take into consideration some of the bigger drivers of the operational budget, which would be things like fuel cost, cost of materials, Another big one is insurance. So we're waiting to see how much of a pill we might have to swallow with regards to insurance rates. Next slide. With this slide, there's not much I really want to talk to you about this other than the asset management plan had stated that our annual capital spend should be about 5.1 million. Based on historical analysis, we've only been contributing about 2.2 million annually. So we have created a funding gap over the years. So that's something that I think we started to address in 2022 with the capital programs that we took on. And I think we'll see that as to what's on the capital budget for 2023, that we're starting to close that gap. But it's one of those things you're always going to be kind of catching up. Next slide, please. One of the things in the asset management plan was that if we put a capital levy in place, so if outside of what we were going to do for tax-based increases to cover operating and capital, if we wanted to put in a levy, like a 1.2% capital levy, how would that grow over the 5 years, and how would that, as you accumulate funding from things like OCIF, how can that build up going forward? So that's what this slide is meant to show. Next slide, please. The only thing out of this slide that I'd like people to kind of just look at is the average condition of our assets. So machinery and equipment, that was rated as poor, and we've made strides since that asset management plan was done for the township. So things like the capital spend in 2022 for the fire truck, the tandem truck that is going to be looked at for 2023. All those things are going to help upgrade this average condition to a more reasonable level. So with this slide is really how how reserves fit into the equation when we're looking at budgeting. So this, as of November 30th, is what's in everybody's budget or everybody's reserve, I should say. So administration 200,000, fire department, between buildings, vehicles and communication equipment, and then public works. So all of these are funds that we have available to us, and we can transfer out in the budget year once we set that. So what was set for 2022 was for vehicles 125,000, which went towards the tanker purchase, public works for various projects, storm sewers, same thing, 45,000 there, and then the Johnstown water 9,000 there. So we decide when we look at the capital items that are to be spent that year as to how we're going to fund them.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
And I think I know the answer, but just again, for everyone else, the number in the left column, the balance of November 30th is still the same today. The numbers on the right and the brackets had already been taken out before that number was there. It's not that number minus, it's not 187 minus 125, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
That's right. And also the numbers will change a bit because we do get interest on that account. So the more we drop for me, it's allocate December's interest to these numbers. So they will change a little bit. Budget guidelines. So inflation, we've kind of talked about this in in several places. The non-market change increase, so that would be that 1.59% as far as impact leaving their assessment. As no changes, so just the growth of the community. Asset management, we always have to look at that 5-year capital forecast. Something that we'll look into a little bit later, not right now. Service levels, I think when we're deciding the budget, just to have that conversation, do we want to increase service levels? Do we want to maintain service levels, or do we want to decrease service levels in some areas? And then we would set the budget accordingly. User fees. We would look at all of the user fees that are in the budget currently and say, do any of those need to be adjusted for inflation? So that would be the arena for any of those recreation programs. And Mike's not here, but I know that when he sent me his budgets, he incorporated a lot of that in as to what the new pricing would be. Any new service requests? So anything that comes in, if we want to offer a new service to the general. Reserves, again, that's the integral piece of our financial health. We don't want to deplete reserves too quickly, and we want to make sure that we're adequately funded for when we have future items that will require a bit of spend. And then balanced budget is we do have to balance the budget, so any revenues, expenditures, and reserve transfers all balanced to zero. So when we're looking just with the budget objectives and future considerations, obviously we want to maintain our financial health because our financial health is excellent. Maintain consciousness of affordability for taxpayers. So make sure that the taxpayers are getting good value for what they're paying. Provide sustainable service levels and incorporate a 5-year capital plan. I would also like to see, just as we go further along into this council's term, expanding that to include some of the operating budget items, to take more of a forward look as to what might be happening from an operational perspective. And then we have a detailed plan going forward. Nothing would ever be set in stone. It all has to go through the same approval processes, but just something that helps for future planning. And future considerations in case there's any reassessments, the tax revenues and property bills, tax bills, development of a long-term financial strategy to fund future capital. That was what I spoke about previously as far as incorporating along to the 5-year capital plan, just a 4-year overall plan. That would take those considerations into effect and give us a chance to be ahead of the curve rather than fighting fires. Sorry, Brian. So next step, where we go from here is our meeting number 2 would be to look at the draft capital business cases for consideration. So the next document, the last document that we're going to review tonight, we would go into that document into further detail and decide, okay, what is good for 2023, what can we push to 2024, what can we realistically do in 2023? Is this going to span multiple years? As far as we might have it all in the 2023 budget, but it might actually carry over into 2024. So how do we balance that in the budget? After that, I would present the operational budget. So that would be everybody's departments, and I've received everybody's operational budgets, which is awesome. Then after that, we would review the consolidated budget And then hopefully to get us back on track by the March council meeting, we would then pass the budget. And then that way we would still be on time for all of our Q1 reporting, as far as reporting back to council in April. We would have all of that. So we're a little bit behind, but we have the opportunity to catch up. So that is the part of the presentation.
Couple questions, if you're, or I don't know if others have questions before I go, so. Do you want to, anyone have questions that they want to ask at this point?
I have one here. Oh, yeah. Through the chair to the treasurer, page 9 of 23. Our 1.59 projected growth.
Yeah.
1.59. Obviously, the goal is to get our projected growth up. What does that consist of? More homes? To get our projected growth up?
Yeah, more additions to the tax roll.
Right.
Well,
It could be homes, could be commercial,
could be commercial, could be
Yeah.
farm, could be anything.
Sorry.
Could be a deck. Right, there's a.
Yeah.
It's growth, right? The deck.
Oh, yeah. I see what you're saying. Yeah,
Just anything that would change.
right.
So, anyone else?
So, I we'll both feel. Like, yeah, I agree with the statement that we're in good financial health, but then I see this $2.9 million gap every year on capital. And I question, how do we still feel good about that? I guess is what I'm saying in my mind anyways, to you now.
Yeah, so that, I think that's a fair question. I think when we look at the financial review, which we're going to look at next, is while there's a gap, it's not dire. And can still be mitigated.
Think if you want to go, you go first. I was gonna jump too, but you go ahead.
I guess with respect to that, we'll call that 2.9 million gap or deficit. We're no different than I think anybody else worldwide. There's an infrastructure gap with respect to that. And I would say back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, it was usually 10-cent dollars. So the municipality put in 10 cents towards every dollar, and either the province or the feds would be paying 90%. In what it really ended up with is now a switch, and really what the upper tiers are indicating is that we're going to have to find a way to manage our assets, and I think across the board, not just in Ontario, but probably North American wide, is that it's time to start to have a complete focus on the life cycle of an asset. If we're going to run that program or service, and you need a plow, you better be budgeting for that plow when it comes due for replacement. And it's going to be a 25 to 50 year plan to get things back on the way. And I think, as the treasurer mentioned, about that 1.2% sort of capital levy compounded starts to get you in that direction, because everything is based on that historical cost. Right. Some of our net worth value on an asset may be $1, and we're replacing it with a $350,000 vehicle. Right. Over that 12 years, we should be looking to put enough away to replace that vehicle in 12 years. Maybe you can extend it to 13 or 14. Maybe it needs to be replaced in 10. There's always that little bit of attitude, but I think overall, I think where we are with respect to the financial stability that we have with reserve and the reserve fund, I think, as the treasurer mentioned, we're in pretty good shape overall, understanding that there's still a massive infrastructure gap that we've got to work on.
Yeah.
That makes any sense.
No, I think that's certainly helpful. I think an easy example is we're coming up to it, but the water treatment facility or the storm sewer or the sewer issues, especially if you're following any of our neighbors who, are finding themselves replacing things that they haven't been. I think we've been doing a 1.2 basically on our water and sewer for a long time, maybe not on the rest of the budget, but we've certainly been doing that. I know we put in, I think it's a $7 levy, I don't know what it's called, fee for Cardinal water, so we could save towards the project that was going on, so it would help reduce the costs of that going forward and the replacement of that system. But looking at others around us, especially to the east, and I was reading Brockville's last night, they managed to get down there to a 6% increase for their water this year, but to the east, the numbers for them over the next 10 years, I think they were suggesting 15 and 20% increases every year for the next 10 years, because they were so far behind in what exactly we're being told. So it's the importance of staying on top of that, and while we won't always agree on that, there's certainly value to making sure we do try to close the gap a little bit. Okay. That's a good one if you read about what they're trying to do. What happens if you don't?
Mhm. Sure. Any other questions?
Fire. Go.
Just more of a definition, what exactly through the chair is modernization funding? Can you give me some background on that?
Want me to take it?
Sure.
I can take it. So when the current, so we have Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund, where the province gives us funding towards various projects. And if I slip on the CAO, please correct me. But when we first came into office, the new government, the provincial government, recognized that there were probably going to be reductions in OMPF funding. It's normally a stable, pretty reliable fund, but they recognized that it was going to be less. So what they did was they gave, instead of forcing amalgamation or forcing amalgamation, they gave municipalities across Ontario sizable amounts of money to find efficiencies in their processes to offset the loss of OMPF funding. And you could use it. There weren't that many restrictions on how it could be used. If you felt that buying a new fire truck with that money would help make your township more efficient and help you save money, then that was how you spent it. What we did with a portion of it, with our first portion of it, was we did a service delivery review, a super high level one, to show us some ways to find efficiencies and get to that ultimate goal. We really haven't, I don't believe, done a ton of it, although we've worked with software and we're making constant strides toward improving, the office and the computers and things like that. Definitely the software. I think we have a fuel system now. There've been some small strides that way, but there's still a long way to go. But the modernization fund it's kind of like what it says. It was to modernize, the way we provide services and try to find efficiencies in that to offset the loss of funding from the province.
So it's a one-off?
No, they've done 3 or 4 rounds of it. This is the first round because we never spent it. We don't qualify for any until we actually spend it. So when they give it out, it's meant to actually be utilized. So we kept ours in a bank account, collected a lot of interest on it, while others around us, recognize, put it to use, get to work, and reapply for the next round.
So how often do the rounds come around?
I'm not sure when. Maybe the CAO knows if there's another round that's coming, but there certainly are ways to go. Find efficiencies.
I would say through the chair, that first round was more of what I would say a formula based. Where some of the later rounds are more project specific based. I would say from the municipality, we were cautious on not to receive the money and then jump quick at a particular didn't want it to, we'll call it burn a hole in the pocket, but I think in that service delivery review, there were some areas that we were able to start to focus in on. One of the big areas that was identified in that service delivery review was the development of a little bit more of a strategic plan. And as council is aware, one of those items was respect to asking for sort of the priority list of some of the areas that you'd like to accomplish individually, and that will hopefully set the stage for next month, where we can at least start to formulate a little bit more long-term plan.
There's lots, so I'm gonna go on a limb here and guess that most of the members of council, I know, the deputy mayor and I would have a copy of the SDR somewhere. Is there a way that we can get the other three a copy of it, just so that they know if they want to read it, great, if they don't, great, but so that they know when we do talk about it or refer to it.
Yeah, certainly, I believe that was posted online when
Was it on the website?
but should be on the website. We can certainly make sure that everybody has a copy of it.
Yeah, because I think, again, it's a book that you have to have on the shelf. You know, and then when something comes along, that the province is looking to fund, we've done the study, we've got the review that points towards, you know, utilizing those things, we can pull that document down and utilize it to back up, you know, a funding request or grant applications as well. So, you know, what's in there and seeing what your focus is, you know, some of your strategies or some of your goals maybe in there as well.
Thank you. Yeah, if I could, even if everybody goes to page 5 of 23 of the presentation. Tax payment change for median. Just sort of in around there, you're looking at 2018, 2019, I believe, for that. I believe the modernization funding came out in 2019. So if you look at the OMPF funding,
Yeah,
in 2019, it was 850,500. Following year, it dropped for ourselves to 740,000 down to 646. So in line with that's part of that, where you have the modernization funding looking for areas.
question.
Sure.
I think I know the answer to this yet, but I'm not sure that if it's an open discussion yet or not, but do we have this year's OMPF funding announcement?
Yes, we do. I believe the treasurer has that. I guess.
Am I right in thinking it's 740 something?
No, I didn't have one yet because it's operating.
I would like to say that we are. I'll have to confirm what that number is.
It's a good answer.
It has increased. It has increased from our 2022.
Yeah, we're back in the sevens again.
Something tells me it's like it was like 30 or 35,000.
So it's less than last. I have it in my mind, 740, but I couldn't remember. Oh, I have a couple more questions if you'll allow me. Are you done? Nope, are you done? No. You go with it. Okay, so the case, we're gonna see a case made to put in a capital infrastructure levy that's going to be 1.2% compounded. annually, it's just. I don't honestly remember where he mentioned, where Sean mentioned it, but I think, oh, we discussed it from page 10.
Page 11.
Page
10
11.
on, I wrote it down on page 10, so.
1 point.
So that we're gonna make the case for that. So and I think I understand the premise behind it is so that it closes some of the gap in eventuality. How do you like, so if we start at 1.2% this year, that gives us 70-some thousand dollars, and then that number would double plus compounded interest the next year and so on and so forth. So the longer you go without touching it, obviously, the more funds there are there, but what guideline, like, what are the guidelines? What, or am I getting too into the weeds with this already? Like, you get the concept, I think, and what it would do. But what are the guidelines behind touching that money and utilizing that money for any project?
Well, I would think that when we decide on the 75,000, where that's going to go, which long-term capital projects it's going to fund, then it would go to that respective reserve account. And that could change every year.
Yeah, because depending upon who sits around the table. The first group that comes in after us could say, yeah, that's great that you felt that way. We don't feel that way anymore. And they could utilize that 5%, however they felt like they wanted to use it.
Mhm.
Right. That's the danger of.
So through the chair, I would think that, when the reserve and the reserve fund policy, comes around again, it is to establish that sort of framework so that at least, if there is a change of direction of the next council, let's say, that it needs to go through that bylaw process where it's not just sort of changed on a whim, so to speak.
So
That there would be a process.
okay, and then just again, so my brain's right on this. So we, as a municipal government, have to do a balanced budget. It has to be zero. You can't budget a surplus, you can't budget a deficit.
Correct.
Right.
It needs to be a balanced budget.
So it has to be. So if we have a deficit from last year,
Yes.
that has to come in and we have to make that up this year.
So through the chair, we would need to make that up by pulling from reserve to balance that.
To balance it. Right.
And then.
And then top of the
The
reserve.
the
that we used
suggestion
up.
would be that you would, the amount that you took out of reserve to balance that, you would help to actually make that up.
Okay.
In 2020.
So for everybody understanding that, so then the opposite of that, if we run a surplus this year, what would we do with the surplus that we would have this year?
Typically, the surplus would be divided up amongst the various departments based on their 5-year capital ask or anticipated expenses. For the last year, the surplus, it was decided because we had the two major drainage projects in Spencer and Johnstown, that surplus would actually go towards those projects instead of just amongst the various departments.
So the surplus went towards those reserves.
Yes, basically injuries.
That was transferred out. Okay, so in my small little mind, the capital levy, the 1.2% levy that goes into a dedicated reserve, correct? So it's ultimately budgeting 1.2% more than what we anticipate needing to run the township this year. And we're putting that extra 1.2% in the reserve. That's sort of the idea, so that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and when we have an aging piece of infrastructure that needs to be done, we utilize those dollars towards that.
Conceptually, yes.
Conceptually, yes. And the reason. So like, because I struggle with this part, and then, I just, I don't wanna quash it yet, because I'm trying to keep an open mind. But in my mind, that's what reserves are for. So, but the reason that we're adding 1.2% more, that the ask is that we add 1.2% more. Is because we recognize that there's a gap, and we're trying to close that gap up a bit. Is that, so that this little brain gets it, is that kindergarten enough? Yes,
Essentially, yes.
yeah, okay, all right. That was that question.
I guess for the, I kind of don't like using that analogy, but how do you know, eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time,
Yeah,
right? And that's really what it is, right? It's a massive elephant in the room with respect to the infrastructure you have, and you're not gonna change it in 1 year, in 3 years, and 5 years, but sticking with the plan for 15, 20 years, you start to see those particular items. So like the drainage project, if you were going to do a massive drainage project and you start to build up those reserves, you have that in that thing to do.
Right, and I think, from a, you're looking at it from a staff and operational standpoint, and I'm looking at it from, an elected person standpoint, and we just went through an election where we have two different, sort of mandates, and my thought process is in that 15 to 20 years, you're gonna see 3 different governments, or possibly 4 different governments, or councils, and different mandates over those terms as well, and that's my worry about those reserves getting to us.
I guess through the chair, my counterpoint is I'm not necessarily sure that we're that much different in the viewpoint. What we're really looking at is managing the assets and the finances, so it's relatively consistent for the taxpayer, so that it's not a 0-0 and then a 10 or 15% increase, which is hard to sustain for a good portion of the residents. So it's really about trying to say, hey, right, we're gonna do something like 3% each year, and right, to make it more manageable.
Well, even like the treasurer had said, and I, I take that graph with the growth and I flip it over. Right, where we reduce taxes, where it does the draw. Right, if you flip the chart over and you look at it this way. Do I have that the right way? Yeah, that way. Had we have done 0 instead of the negatives, you could add up all of those increases, and that's what we would have today is virtually what you're suggesting at that 1.2. So instead of doing those reductions, had we just stayed course, even stayed at 0, and done, or even tiny little small incremental increases, we would have seen that as the pluses, not the negatives.
In an oversimplified manner, if we look at that page 4, the total residential tax rate back in 2012, 1.217469. If you would have maintained that total tax rate, barring the phase-in portions that residents are going to see an increase, right? If you were not seeing an increase like through phase-in, for lack of a better one, your taxes would have maintained steady. We would have just taken what the education or counties may have been reducing. We would have captured that and thrown it into reserves.
Right, which ultimately would have been the 1.2% every year.
It may have been potential.
Because
But that's
growth this year, again, I mean, as long as we don't do anything crazy this year, growth is 1.59, so you're already experiencing, 79,000 there, you got a reduction of 14.7 in policing, you're at almost $90,000 or maybe $93,000, something like that, ahead already of what last year's number was, and that's without the 1.2 added on. I mean, I know it's not as simple as that, but But had we have done that every year for the last 10, and left things well enough alone, we would have seen those kind of increases every year. Yeah, okay, we can move on.
Okay.
I don't think I have any other ones. I might have some more, but I'll fire them later.
Well,
Again, they're in the weeds.
I only have one, but it became two suddenly with this modernization conundrum we talked about. If we had in 2019 used that modernization money, do I understand correctly that we could have then gone and got other funding? So, while we might have gained, I'm gonna say $10,000 a year in interest on that 200 and some odd $1,000. We could have actually got more funding by just actually applying for more funding for OMPF instead.
That is
Not
correct.
for all.
Or sorry, for whatever sort of further modernization initiatives.
So I don't believe that every request for modernization funding for project basis is granted.
Could have applied.
But could we have applied?
There's no guarantee.
But there is no,
Yeah, and through the chair, offhand, do you know of anybody who was declined from funding like that? Regularly, versus, or, like, in other words, what's the success rate, I guess? Yeah.
But I think our next door neighbor, they utilized their dollars and then they applied for secondary funding for some projects that they're doing together, correct? Like Augusta and Prescott. They did a combined service delivery review, and then I think out of that, they have a few projects that they're applying or have applied for. More
I think
modernization.
I would say through the chair with going back to the premise of that modernization program, which is partnerships, efficiency and effectiveness. If you're putting forward a project that is partnering with, another municipality or a few municipalities, it's most likely a higher chance of success.
Maybe this will help. And I don't think it'd be that hard to find it. I can certainly find it, but would it be worthwhile to maybe make sure that the members have a copy of the modernization letter? And what its actual purpose was? Just so that they understand, then we don't have to have this conversation.
We certainly can provide that, and I believe the treasurer has the modernization fund, what we spend it on as part of that quarterly report next month.
Yeah.
We can certainly provide that corresponding that letter.
Yeah. And it's worthwhile noting too, I think, in this, when you get to modernization funding, I think when you see the 255 in the brackets, that'll be work in progress going forward for upstairs, correct? Yep. Should get approved, but I think that's the idea is to, and I think when you read the letter and then you see the use of it, it makes a lot of sense, so. Sorry to steal your meeting, Sean. Fire away.
Well, this is a discussion, right?
Fair enough.
That's the whole point.
Oh, I did have one more.
Sure.
And maybe you just read it now. So, and I was just reading the balanced budget part again, and that reserve transfers are balanced to zero. I did send you this in advance. Do we know where we are in relation to last year's budget?
We certainly won't see a 700,000 surplus like we did last year. I'm expecting to show actually a deficit. So when I looked at things like two that stuck out to me, like it's still really early. We're still processing December invoices. We normally don't have a real lock on this number till mid-February, but if we meet for budget meeting number 2 on February 2nd, I would have a much better idea as to where we are, but I am expecting a deficit of maybe a couple $100,000. Like repairs and maintenance on vehicles was about 50,000 more than what was originally budgeted. Fuel has been a lot, so it's when you have things as volatile as fuel and materials, it's hard to know when you're setting a budget in January, February,
Yeah.
what your November, December bills are gonna look like.
So question in that, so let's, and again, I know we're throwing theoreticals, but if it was roughly 240,000 deficit, that's equivalent to 4% tax increase. At 60,000, right?
Sure.
And we have to make that up before we do this budget, so it comes out of reserves that are existing to pay that 240 back. And then we would have to, I don't know if it's bylaw that we have to do that, but we would top those reserves back up automatically, and then we would build them to this year's standard. In addition to that, we'd be paying, ultimately, we'd be adding that 4% to this year's budget.
I would say that would likely be a good practice to do it. There's nothing in the bylaw that would say you would be required to do that. But
Yeah, you don't really want to use, I mean, the reserves are there to be used, but. Yeah, okay. I won't go into that.
You may not have to replace that at a 1-for-1 level. Right? You might be able to do that over things in.
I just, again, I think for those that haven't been through the process, I think, knowing that number for me. I know we always sat and we had a discussion about what our appetite for tax increase was. Well, mine's always 0. That's just the way that I'm built. Especially if I don't know where my business was last year. If I lost $1 million this year, should I be increasing taxes, this year? So for me, I always like to know that number before I commit to what my appetite for an increase actually is.
I could certainly, by the time we get to budget meeting number 2, I can have a more fulsome number on that. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is just something that we got recently from the municipal Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. Every year, the return that we have to file at the township is a financial information return. So that all goes to MMAH and shows what we've done as a township, and they've generated this risk assessment, basically a financial indicator review. Now, I'm not going to go into what each of these things are. The only thing that I would take out of this is how we're doing compared to South LT counties. So this shows how we're benchmarked against our peers, and it'll generate a low, moderate, or high. But the one thing that I'd like to take out of this is where we do have a moderate rating is the second one from the bottom. The closing amortization balance is a percentage of total cost of capital assets. This is where it comes into that infrastructure gap, because we do have assets that are in, fair condition or less. So we've got that on the books as either a completely depreciated asset or an almost depreciated asset, and we haven't yet replaced it. So once we replace that, then these two moderates go away. And when I looked at one of the things that was in the presentation as well is the auditors suggest as a rule of thumb, what we should be looking at to spend every year is 1.5 times our depreciation on capital. So our depreciation was actually 1.7 million this year in 2022. So in 2023, we should be looking to spend 1.5 times that. So around $3.3 million basically. And then we then kind of move back into the low risk on this matrix, because what we did last year was we spent 3.3 million in capital with the 1.7 million depreciation. So our ratio is actually 1.9, which is excellent. That's where we would always want to be, which means we're depleting our assets, but we're also adding more. And the projects that we've taken on in 2022 things like the Spencerville or the Johnstown and the Spencerville drainage projects, those are all really long-term assets, 40 to 60-year assets that you're depreciating. So you're depreciating them much slower. So it's better to put money into the roads and stuff, because we get a long return on those assets. And the only other one that I wanted to make note of is that net financial assets or net debt as a percentage of own source revenues. So we're again, really well compared to our peers, which means for these capital funding projects, if we need to take on debt, that's okay, even at a higher interest rate level. We're I guess for background for the rest of council, the threshold, the maximum debt as a township or municipality that we can have is 25%, and our debt is 8%. So we have a lot of room in there for some of these projects that if you've got a 40-year useful life on that asset, taking out a 20-year debenture on that asset is a good idea.
We can get into a good philosophical debate on this one.
We will get I mean, I look at that, maybe I saw it wrong, but I thought that as a net financial assets is why we have, 366%. Seems like a awfully good situation to be in versus 62% for everybody else. I thought that just meant we had a bunch of extra cash, which can help to solve the problem down below, but that's, then you're saying we just have a lower debt.
We have lower debt.
Lower debt. Okay. Most places run debt.
I know. And bounce a budget because you borrow money, right?
And our cash ratio is better than most as well. So that would be one more that you would probably want to be looking at, right? So our cash ratio is a little bit higher as well. So we do have a little more cash than a lot of our peers, and we have a lot less debt than a lot of our peers. So as we decide, as a group, as we decide to look at these projects that are long in nature, dollar intensive, we have levers to pull that might not be available to our peers. Not that we have to use them, but the levers are there. So the last bit was just to take a look at the draft capital budget funding analysis. So the one thing, as we get to budget meeting number 2, what will go along with all of these things that are on the list is everyone will have their business cases on these projects. The one thing that I haven't done on this is tackle the reserves piece as far as what we're going to pull for reserves. That's something that needs to be decided at council. And also same with the grant funding. So on the discussion item memo, the grant funding that we have available to us is the Community Building Fund, or the CCDF, which used to be the gas tax. We have 234,000 in 2023 that we can allocate to capital projects. And the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund, or the OCIF, we have 486,000 that we can add to our capital. And then we also have that 585,000 that we got from the port in December. So that is in our capital dedicated capital reserve fund. So we can use that to fund items that are on this list. So we do have 1.2, 1.3 million of funding available. So we're in a good spot. Maybe the first thing I'll do with this is talk about the notes. So with note 1 at the bottom, with regards to that County Road 2 project, the best way that, the CAO and I decided to present this was to present the total cost as it is on the engineering summary or engineering estimate. Not the actual cost, that's still waiting for tender. On February 7th is when the tenders closed, and we'll have a better idea what the project will actually cost. But we do have some funding secured from the province of 1.5 million, but the project estimate was 4.2. So then we look at how we're going to fund the rest. But this is a joint project with the county, so the county has it on their budget to fund this. So once their budget is approved and we know how much is going to be coming to us, then we can decide how to fund the remainder. But we had estimated our portion would be about 950,000 or so. But instead of just putting 950,000 and how do we fund that out of granting and taxation, doesn't really show the whole picture. So we thought it was be better to present the whole cost and different places, because some of it is in the rate-based part of the equation where it's the users that pay, and then the tax-based where it's funded by taxation. Same thing with note 2, with that drainage project. We're gonna have to pay the bills on that as they come in. So we're expecting to pay out $300,000. 55,000 of that is the township's responsibility. The rest of it will be allocated back to the people that benefited from the project through the taxes. So it's not the only part that comes from either reserves or taxation is that $5,000. The rest is covered by the beneficiaries of the project, which we are one, and that's where our 55,000 comes from. Now, I don't know from a discussion standpoint how far you want to get into some of these items in a detail level. If we would rather, this will be the main focus of budget meeting number 2. So the reason why I included this here was so that everybody had some time with it to look it over, and then as the business unit owners present their business cases, then we can have a more fulsome discussion. So to the chair.
Yeah. So we're gonna go through it a little bit though.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just sort of surface.
I'm just concerned too, because with all due respect to, like, we talk about recreation.
Yeah.
Mike is not here, so.
Well, I don't think we're gonna make any decisions. I think it's just more for information for us so that we know what this page means.
But we could go through everything on the list as far as to give the backstory of where it all came from.
That sounds like a great idea if you wanna walk through it. Sure. Is that CAO, is that?
Okay. So if we start at the top, start administration, the 350,000 we talked about as potentially for renovating the upstairs. Obviously, it hasn't been tendered, hasn't been costed, so we don't know really what that amount is, but we would like to do it in 2023, and the bulk of that will come from the modernization funding.
Question?
Yep.
The amount that's coming out of modernization funding is 255, it's 350 is projected.
Yeah.
And where the other 95 is coming,
It would come out of the administration reserve.
administration. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And then 35,000 for a server replacement. So our servers are out of date in the office. We can have a really deep discussion on the fire department's capital at 0. But they are putting $220,000 into reserve in 2023 for future capital projects. That's a good thing to be proactive. Now, County 2 rehab project, the total cost of that project is 4.2 million, but it's just allocated between the road portion the storm portion, and then the water and sewer portion. So once we see the tender on February 7th, we'll have a better idea of what the actual costs are. And also hopefully in there would be a timeline for completion. So that's a pretty big project, so. In my discussions with Gord, depending on who bids on the project and who's selected for the project, to decide whether it's done in 1 year or 2 years. Am I correct in that?
Through the chair, yes, basically, right now, the way the work's been laid out, the engineering firm believes it can be done in 1 year. Staff might be a little more skeptical just in past practice, but again, depending on the size of the company that was awarded the tender, they may have 2 IOs rather than 1 IO working the project or whatever, so it's feasible and be done in a year.
When we're going, sorry if I may, toward so I think from a budgeting standpoint, we can't rely upon it being next year's budget. It's most likely going to be this year's budget.
That's correct. We would, wouldn't want to come up short when they're moving ahead on it.
Right.
Okay.
Same thing with Newport drainage. We're just gonna wait and see. We don't have a date for the tender yet on this one, but the other portion of that project has been completed, so we will want to do our portion. As far as Spencerville and Johnstown drainage, all of that is funded through WIP. So we accounted for the whole project last year. So that money that wasn't spent last year is carried over. So none of that will come from taxation. And we do have our loan proceeds, which is covering most of that outlay of costs anyways. Waste disposal site. Again, that 58,000 is a WIP project from 2021. Scott Street Transfer Station. All these numbers are just things that I've gotten from the heads of the departments, so they would be better. If there's any specific questions on that now, they might, if they're here, they would be better to ask than myself.
I think I'll just ask the CAO, where are we with the, I think the site's been cleared for the transfer station, or at least there's been some beginning work on clearing the site for the transfer station, but is it conceivable that it will get done this year?
Through the chair, I'll have maybe the director of operations, just give a little bit of an update with respect to the transfer site.
Certainly. Through the chair, basically, I've been in contact with J2PG or JP2G, right, which is our consultant for the transfer station and water monitoring, so forth. As far as the clearing operations staff, it started clearing out the roadway leading into the transfer site, and the actual area of the facility has not been cleared yet. Can't get in with the high hole, so it makes it quite difficult. It's just waiting for it to freeze to try and get in and get a little more clear there. Yeah, basically it's a fairly large area, so if we can get in there with that brush head and start taking some of that stuff down, that we can get it leveled, and then it will require a fair amount of fill in there. It's low and wet all the time, so we're also looking at that. But that's the engineer group that takes care of our system there to provide a quote for providing the detailed drawings for the completion of the transfer station. So working aside from winter maintenance and so forth going on, staff are trying to get in there when time allows to clear that, but it's been challenging so far.
So back to you, the 125 that's in the budget isn't to actually finish the station. Is that just to get the drawings done and to get the land cleared?
That's the drawings, land clear, some material possibly. The original in 2014, the original estimate for the whole project was $200,000. We've got like 5,000 invested in it now, and with inflated prices, it could be a lot more. However, with our staff doing the work, it takes up a lot of that, and we're looking at other means to slim that budget down and keep it low as possible within our own operating parameters and projects and so on.
Okay. Yeah.
Through the chair to director of operations or CAO. Why are we moving the transfer station from where it is now till there? What was the reason for that? As a citizen, because I didn't know nothing about that.
So, through the chair to answer Sam. I would say, the transfer site where it is now was originally meant to be a temporary location. Back probably in around that 2013-2014 timeframe, we looked at 3 options to make more of a permanent transfer site location. And the desire was to look at sort of Scott Road right in and around there. However, the temporary transfer site was working out okay, functioning fine. So the thought process was, let's just try to make that the permanent transfer site. The reality is that that current site is a little confined with respect to the separation of materials with respect to tires, brush, where it can be burned, plus the items that we transfer off-site, including the metal and just the larger items. We did have a fire at that location, I'm going to say about 2 or 3 years ago that really precipitated some concern amongst the members around the council table at that time. And it was really, the idea was that we need a much bigger space where we can get the separation and mitigate risk with respect that should a fire jump a little bit, that we're not actually, it's not seeping down in through the cover into what used to be an active waste disposal site, which, you know, we could be weeks upon months trying to trace that and track it and extinguish it. So I think that was really the premise to look at moving it.
So just one more question. Are we gonna be able to,
Yes.
are we
Go
gonna be
ahead.
able to still burn on the other side? Are we not gonna be closer to the 401 now?
Through the chair, part of what we're working on with that draft ECA would still permit the burning of of materials that were permitted to burn now. It would just allow much greater distance separation between some of those other materials that we don't want to end up igniting. That's the for the Coles Notes version of how that one came to be.
Carrying on, move over to recreation. From Mike's budget, recreation coordinator budget, manager of recreation budget, sorry. Pool heaters for both pools for Johnstown and Cardinal. 100,000, so 50,000 for each pool heater. They do need to replace one of their assets for trucks, so 55,000 for that. Diamond lights for the Cardinal ball diamond, 20,000. Lawn tractor for 33,000. This dog park and parking lot, I think, was a carryover item. Not sure where that's gonna go. The dock repair and rebuild, I think it was just needs to be done. The portable defibs need to be replaced, so that was 10,000 for that. And then the Johnstown tennis courts, there was a carryover from 2022 that didn't proceed based on funding. There is still a bit in WIP of 45,000, which came from the Port of Johnstown in their CCF Community Capital Fund. So we have that as part of the funding for that project, should it proceed.
A couple questions.
Sure.
For consideration, I know it's Johnstown tennis courts. Can we add the Cardinal ones back in there as well with the estimate that we had for those as well?
Mhm.
For consideration, we can always take it back out, but I'd like them to be in there for consideration at least. Done. And secondly, a truck for replacement, asset number 750. Just something that I've been thinking, over as we, get closer and closer to electric cars, electric vehicles. Looking through climate change lenses. For something that's as light duty as what the recreational truck would be. Is that something that we can look through a climate change lens and see if there is a way to do some sort of electrified vehicle for that?
Through the chair, I think that's certainly something that we would look at with respect to options.
I'd like to see, I know we're not gonna get it done for 55, but I think, from a climate standpoint, if we're going to be expected to move towards that, it might be at least looking through that lens, whether we choose to do it or not, at least having the option in front of us might not be a bad thing.
Through the chair, sorry, the Johnstown tennis courts has gone up a lot since I last recalled it, hasn't it? Or I thought it was about 100,000 or something.
Yeah, the numbers that are reflected in here is what was in the 2022 budget. So I don't know if they would need to be re-tendered. Likely they would, so there might be a change in that cost.
Through the chair, just to indicate that, the 226 amount was full replacement, including lights, fencing, where you may have seen earlier on in 2022, or after we didn't receive that funding of sort of a reduced portion of that to try to get at least a portion of the courts done and sort of make it a little bit more of like a 2-year or phased in project to get that.
Good.
Mr. Chair.
Sorry, Steve.
That's fine, and it's, there's a $79,000 engineer report on that too, out of that 226. It was brought in with the application for the charter. That's where we got the 226.
Okay.
I think I've been on this, I got it down to the nickels and dimes. Believe me, it's 4 years on this baby for me, so, yeah, we're there's some, I hope Mike can readjust that to the actual quotation. So what we're gonna do.
Chair. Yes, we will look to revisit that, but we also have to be very cautious with respect to the procurement policy, making sure that we're having not just one quote.
Yeah.
What we can do.
Yes, that's true. And a note of that, there's another 5,000 that goes on that through Sarah, which has been passed through Sarah to donate 5,000 towards that pickleball tennis court. So we have 45 plus 5,000.
Okay.
So it's 50,000.
One last, if I may, and I know we're going through it now. I'll save this next meeting. The dog park and parking lot. There is potential though that we could do a dog park without a parking lot and a parking lot without a dog park, though, correct? They're not hinged together.
That is correct. That the possibility exists. What I would say is that in and around the ingredient center, parking is at a premium. I would not recommend adding another asset without additional parking, where I would say that additional parking without completing the dog park would be a benefit on its own. So I wouldn't do it, I wouldn't do a dog park without adding parking, but I would certainly just add parking.
and when we get the business case for that, for the 110, will we see how big of a parking lot and what scope of work we can expect to be done? When the business case is made, is that something that we're going to see for that dollar value? Because it doesn't seem like very high for the amount of work that needs to be done, that's all.
So, yeah, through the chair, I would say that the manager of Park Rec facility would have that available. What we had looked at for the most part was having our in-house forces do some of that work to look at keeping the costs down. And that the main portion of that we would be looking to contract out on that end of it would be the paving portion, if it was to be paved, and the fencing. But what we are trying to capture is with the area of that second ball diamond, utilizing as much of the existing fence as possible, and just adding sections to that against that. So that's why that number is a little bit lower than if it was something that was going to be sort of completed inside.
Okay, so we'll be doing cell logos ourselves. I look at the two, whatever it is, the 226 to do the Johnstown tennis courts. And then I look at the size of what the tennis courts would be compared to the size of what that big parking lot would be. And I wonder why one's double the cost of the other, that's all. I know they're not the same, what tennis court is in a parking lot, I know it's built probably to a little different specification and stuff, but it just. From the magnitude and the amount of spaces and stuff. Seems hard to me. Move on.
Moving on. Public Works. 350,000 for the T5 tandem. We've talked about that already. The tender for that closes on February 14th. So then we'll have an idea of how much the quotes are to that estimate, and also delivery. Because there was some indication that there might be an 18-month delivery on that.
Question?
Yep.
So if it's an 18-month delivery, we would pay a portion of the 350 up front, we would pay none of the 350 up front, or we would pay all of the 350 up front.
And the Director of Operations.
I believe, through the chair, I believe the typical in the past, it's been on delivery. for payments.
So nothing to hold. Once it's delivered, so if it's an 18, where I'm going with this, if it's an 18-month, we just need to make sure that we have the 350 next year to pay for it. But it wouldn't necessarily be in this year's actual budget.
I would say it would not necessarily be this one, but this is the first time we've ever had a situation like this too, so. That may be a point that the contractor wants to negotiate, I'm not sure.
Okay, and year was, if. But, no, go, no, I was,
No, I was sure, the only thing that I would sort of indicated, we wouldn't know until the tender comes in, but what we have found, at least with the last two fire apparatus, and I can't recall if it was on the last truck, was that they were looking for that. When they received the chassis on location, that they may be requesting that we pay for that chassis as an upfront.
so we may have all three of the options that I had said.
Potentially,
But not necessarily. I guess I'm just looking at the final number we need to get to, and that 350 may not be included in it, but there might be a transfer to the reserves as a portion of that 350. Might be ultimately where we end up.
I was gonna say to the chair, would you not put it all to the reserves and then pull it out as you needed it, but maybe I'm just doing this.
Well, I think
Yeah.
discussion will have
I
that,
think,
but
yeah, like,
yeah.
they're not, whether, if the feeling is that it would not arrive until 2024, then. Maybe it's more palatable to put 200,000 in reserve dedicated for that. That would cover the chassis if need be in that year. And then worst case scenario, if we don't, well, I wouldn't say worst case, best case scenario, it arrived early in 2023, then the realization is that council that know that we would be pulling from reserve for that difference.
The other 140 you'd put in next year's budget, reducing the effect of those.
Yeah, so likewise to a previous meeting we had where we were discussing the pool itself. In the Cardinal Pool integrated. We sort of talked about, could we put some into this year aside so that we just didn't get shocked next year with the sticker shock up, and I don't see that on here, so I was gonna go with that.
That's good. I didn't notice that it wasn't on.
Yeah, I didn't receive any direction on that.
That's a big number too.
Yeah,
That's fair.
That's a good catch. Because that's a big,
Yeah, it was.
it's a substantial number, actually. Yeah.
I'll follow up with,
So in fairness, it may just not have been noted in there because it's just gonna be a transfer to reserve that we were talking about in 2023.
Because we can't do the work
Because
this year, anyways, right?
we're not looking to do necessarily that, but the treasurer will follow up. So sure, it's on that.
I'll look at it,
Well,
I'll look at the sheets to see if he indicated that transfer to reserves on his budget. And then if there is, then I'll add it to the sheet so everybody is aware. As far as roads, pretty self-explanatory as to what roads we're going to want to do. The one project that I would like to note is just the Weir Bridge Rehabilitation Project. That is based on what we know now would be about a $794,000 job. However, thought it was best to split that over 2 years. So the work that needs to be done in 2023 as far as the expansion joint, that is what you see here, is the 129,360. And then the balance of 664 is moved to 2024 that will look for to fund that in our 2024 budget.
Question?
Yep.
Zipping back to the Totem road base replacement, is that a combined project with North Grenville?
Through the chair, that is correct. I believe this year 2 or 3 for the Totem Ranch Road. Maybe this is year 2. This is the second. Okay. So
This is our portion of that.
That would be
spoken to that.
50% of the project.
But that's just getting the base, that's not paved or anything, is that right, to the chair, to the?
Through the chair, that's correct. It would be a 2-year project over 2 years. First year is base
Yeah.
ditching and drainage and getting the road base in a good position.
Second.
Second is actually asphalt.
Yeah.
So there was some discussion in regard to whether to go with surface treatment or asphalt. There was concerns that we put forward about the 2 businesses on there, and with surface treated roads, having trucks turning onto the surface treatment would
Yeah.
tear them up and
Yeah, no,
and so the thought was, between speaking with, Karen and North Grenville there, we would reduce the width of the top surface and go with, asphalt hot mix. So instead of a 9-meter platform or surface, I should say, we're going to 7-meter wide. In asphalt rather than surface treatment. So the difference is probably 40 millimeters for hot mix, and if it's surface treatment, it's like 15 millimeters. So just a skim on there, which if it was without the businesses, it would maybe okay, but chances are the heavy equipment and so forth, it would get torn up.
Ask about the shoulder machine.
Duly chair, kid, operating manager. Is this a go ahead with us and North Grenville for the year to get a good base?
Through the chair, that it's being budgeted by both.
Okay,
It was originally done last year.
Yeah.
It had passed our budget,
but
but
fail.
failed in
Yeah.
North Grenville.
That's why I want to make sure we're both on the same page if possible.
So,
So, yeah, through the chair, North Grenville deferred.
yes,
Last year.
Yeah, that's right,
They've got a lot of money being spent on 43, so.
46. Thank you.
Counselor. Sorry about
Through
Smith.
the chair to the director, do we, is that east and west end of total or just doing them west end?
through the chair, it would be just the east end, which is our responsibility for maintenance. So Totem Ranch Road, it's Valley Road. It's split with east and west by 416. East is our responsibility to maintain. West is North Grenville's. Their residents had approached their council or at least the mayor and Public Works Department as well as ours in regard to having that fixed, and so it was agreed to start at least with the east.
It is bad. It's bad. It's bad.
Long overdue.
Moving on, with resurfacing roads, Edison and Avenue and Mary Street, those were all whipped from 2022. So no additional funding required. We already have the funding for that. So looking at a total draft budget of about $4.3 million, the tax-based portion of that, and granted, we haven't allocated any of our grant funding, would be about $1.5 million. So as we move through budget meeting number 2, I'm sure there's going to be some things that fall off. There might be some things that get added, we'll go through it, and put in the government grants as we feel they should be allocated. Moving on to all the rate-based funding, so this would be our wastewater and water systems.
Sean, just before you go
Yeah,
to that, and I know we're trying to get through this in a decent and timely fashion. But to those folks that are new on council, I think everybody has a wish list of things that, they believe need to be on budget or that they want to be on budget. And I know at this point, in my first term, I missed the boat when it came to this portion. So if there is something that you want to see added on the budget that will come up for discussion or for debate, that is not currently on here, either now or contact through, to the CAO to have it added to the next meeting so that we can have it for some form of a deliberation and discussion. I mean, this is what we're looking at, but well, I certainly missed out on a few things that I wanted. I wasn't sure how the heck to get them on there. And if you have things that you want added on to here for consideration, I don't know how everybody feels about pool heaters, but if you have somebody you want more than a pool heater, either now's the time or it's not worthwhile waiting to the last to budget for when we're about to approve it and go, well, wait a sec, we never got to talk about, that thing that I wanted to talk about. So you have to make sure that at some point, now or before the next meeting, that those things that you want considered get added to that. Yes,
Sure. Would we be able to take like a 2-minute break?
yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so welcome back. 2-minute break there of the deputy mayor back at the table. And I think I was in the process then of just, reiterating the council not to wait until the last possible second. Like I may have somewhere in the last 4 years to ask for things to be considered in the budget. Now's the time, during the next meeting is the time. Make sure that you get them in there for consideration or they it's going to be pretty much too late. before we get moving.
So, to the chair maybe. On that note, and, by trade, I'm a planner forecaster, and, this gives us the 1 year, and I'd love to also see if possible, and maybe it's a higher level approach to it, but, outline years 24 through 27, for instance, of what else we think we need to put on here. And then we talked about having that on a longer range plan, just as it's probably just a dollar figure, and, because I think that helps us to decide the whole overall picture as far as what dollars we're looking at.
I would agree, and that was originally included here. However, as staff, we haven't really discussed that 5-year plan, but it definitely, as we go forward, in all of the stuff that I would have presented with the pre-budget, I would have included the 5-year capital forecast. So it's something that we do have, just needs a bit of extra consideration at a staff level, because as we ship, not everything is kind of shifted out on the spreadsheet. So I just want to make sure that we're aligned as a group before I present it to council.
Fair, I mean, it is a forecast, and it's, you have to take it with the spirit of, this is our assumption today, what we're gonna need to spend, and things will change. It's as you get closer to those, you can focus them in and stuff. I know you said didn't seem like this year, but I'd also like to see that same thing for operations as well, even if that's just a statistical number going in for 5 years, you can get that.
Further? Nothing?
Moving on.
All right, moving on. Sorry to interrupt there, but I
All
just
good.
wanted to, I know where I ended up the first year and didn't want to end up there.
Oh,
Yes,
So do you want us to suggest it now, or we decided what we're gonna do with it? Or what?
if there's something in addition to what's on this page, I don't think it's a bad idea to make your suggestion if it's something in addition. If it's something that's already on this page, it can wait till next discussion.
Well, there's parts that are on this page, but not what I want.
I proceed.
Well, I'm concerned about, like, we're only going to pave in Johnstown and or the previous can't find it now, but are we paving any other roads in the township this year?
CAO.
Through the chair, at this particular time, no. There's not, it's lower than, it's lower than normal.
There's some reason for that, to the chair. See,
Simply, originally, I would say with respect to the Weir Road Bridge rehabilitation, the $794,000 was in for 2023, and then through further discussion, we looked at that further to look at extending that 2 years. There's certainly additional roads that could be placed in there. There's certainly no shortage. What we're hoping to do is a little bit more of a evaluation to update that 5-year plan.
That's fine. Can I steal for 1 second?
Yeah.
So realistically, we know the ones that are in the most need for the roads management plans. Is that fair? Is it worth, hearing Councillor Smale's concern? I was a little surprised that it was just 2 that were with from last year as well. Is it? I mean, we can cut them. Is it worthwhile adding a couple of projects in there so that we can make a choice between a pool heater and a new truck and a strip pavement? If we don't have that option, then unless we come up with it, we won't get that done. So is it worthwhile maybe putting them in there and making us cut a couple?
Through the chair, we could certainly add some additional road through that road management plan, please for consideration.
There's two roads that I think are really in dire need, and one, I think it's called Reed Street, where the high rise building is.
through, yeah,
Oh, through the chair, sorry.
yeah, through the chair, no doubt that, the, road surface on Reed Street is in poor, condition. But, with respect to, especially in those areas of the, village of Cardinal where we have water and sewer infrastructure, there's some water line repairs, especially the services on Reed Street that need to be done. And with the with County Road 2, that water sewer rehabilitation being a massive project, and it's going to have a big impact on the user rates. We're trying to push the water service replacement out a little bit, but yes, no doubt. And the last thing that we wanted to do was to pave Reed Street, and then
Understand.
as we've encountered in the past, no doubt from your experience as well, and that's what we didn't want. But yeah, there are a number of those roads that certainly could be done right now. It's just that they're not really aligning with some of the other.
Supply issue. North end. I think it's only about a block and a half, if that.
Yeah, well, we can certainly
Bring it up.
have that and bring forward a few streets.
I think through the chair, this conversation makes me remind myself that we had last term, last council discussed Rock Road as well as something to be looked at there. So not that we necessarily are paving it, and we're going to look into what's going on there. So we should probably see that as well. I would think. So.
Yeah, I think those are all worthy of at least budget consideration. It puts us in the spot where we have to make those choices. So. Good, everybody had their, thank you.
We certainly and adds.
That's usually.
I was on it just from the asset management. Right, we're trying to use
the end.
But through the chair, I mean, if we're expecting the tail end at 664,000 for the Weird Bridge Road moving out a year, that'll be an ugly year to we put stuff out then for sure if we do that year instead. So it makes sense to go ahead for sure.
Yeah, sure. Hearing no one else. No, good, let's go.
Moving on.
Quick.
So looking at the user fee based budget. Just very maintenance issues, so the only thing that's really big on here outside of what's already been discussed as far as the County Road 2 is the windmill pump station upgrade. However, that's a dedicated greenfield reserve that they pay into, so it's really no cost to us. It's just whenever they want to do it. We pay the bills and use the reserve funds, and we're okay there. The other Cardinal wastewater and Cardinal water, just the regular capital items that need to be part of the asset management plan there. So if you take the County Road 2 out of there, it's not a lot that's going to be added to the user fees for 2023. So, any questions on that piece?
Just again for I guess us new people in the room. So this expense for the total, for the Cardinal wastewater, Cardinal water, and go to the fees. How is that? That's not all of a sudden lump sum here. Do this all in 1 year, is it? Because what's the process there? I guess
The process, as I understand it, through the chair, is there would have been a levy in place to cover some of this work. So, and these are also gross costs. So we would look at really only what is the township's portion. So once we get that tender in and we get the funding from the county as to what they've approved in their budget, then the difference would be made up by whatever we would pass through to the user fees, or whether we would set up a special levy to pay for it over time. We would enter into a debenture to pay that off, and then it would just balance against that user fee contribution. It's still a little bit preliminary for that, but that's how we would, generally what would go into just the user fee calculations are just the things that are just general capital that needs to be added every year to keep everything going. That's what would be reflected in the user fee. Something like that big work would be something that we would deal with separately. But there should be some funds in reserve to cover this as well from our end.
Yeah, no, I think it was just a matter of how stuff works, kind of conversations. Okay.
Well, thank you for indulging in everything accounting and finance, and again to council. If there's any questions as a result of anything that's in the documentation tonight, please reach out to me and I will do my best to answer any questions. And also, if there is anything that needs to be added to the capital budget, please let me know, and I will add this to budget meeting number 2.
I think, as the chair, just pounding this home for sure, but it's, what the treasurer just said. If there's something you want added on, now's the time. Don't wait, don't regret. And 2, if there's something you don't know or you don't understand the funding, you need to. So don't sit there and not understand. The treasurer is very good at explaining when you want to know, when you need to know. You can come in, sit at the desk. He'll make sure that you understand before you leave the room. So make sure you get answers to those questions.
Through the chair, is there a, how to explain this? Is there I would assume we have sort of a rainy day fund, so if something comes up, you're saying if there's something that we want to add to this. Is there a price limit where, if it's something that's only going to cost $750, let's not worry about it on this budget, whereas if it's going to be, like $7,500, it's a different thing. Is there a ceiling where, you're thinking of doing something that's only going to be $2,000, that's too small to worry about on the budget? Or
So I'll put it back to staff, and maybe we can sell Mr. Martell what the procedure is for spending, maybe under 50,000. That
I'll defer to you. I can handle it. So anything under 50,000 can generally be put on with then just discussion, and then anything over 50 grand would need to go through the procurement policy for buying something. And then same even from 20,000 to 50,000, there's a procurement policy for that level of spending as well. So it would just be like getting multiple quotes, so you're not shown as you're playing favoritism to one thing. But if there is something that you want on, I guess maybe my question back would be, is it operating or capital? Like, is it something that's going to be a capital item that is going to look to be amortized over time, or if it's something that we're going to buy for the township that is more from a service perspective? So is that going to be, is there a service that you want added? Because then we could look at the funding that would be associated with that on the operating side. So I would say bring it all. If there's something that you think might be on the operating side of as far as services, then bring it forward, and staff can discuss it, and we can plan on how we're gonna fund that. But as part of our reserves, there is a working capital component of that. So we have 750,000 in working capital in our reserves. So that is kind of a rainy day fund. We can add to that or take that away as needed.
Thank you.
Not sure if I answered your question.
No, you did.
Okay, good. Thank you.
And that spurred one thing for me, and it was a resident question for budget, and I completely missed it, and I have it in my notes to talk to Mike Spencer about it, adding into the recreation budget, but that was water bottle fill stations for both arenas.
Oh, okay.
If that could be in for, I don't know if that's a big enough item for cost wise to be added into this, or if that ends up just being put into an operating budget somehow. It's not, I don't think it's a huge capital ask by any stretch, but I'm not sure. So
Yeah, so through the chair, we could certainly have the manager of Parks Rec and Facility review that, and it may be just meeting the operating threshold, but we'll make note of that. Because I would certainly want to make note that would be those sort of additional items that are outside what is normally year over year. So that council has a little bit more flavor with respect to that.
And that's just one that I had for that, but I certainly didn't want to disturb the manager while he was on vacation. So, but it was one of those things, and Mr. Martell just sort of hit it because it's such a small dollar value, but where it fits in, I'm not sure. Okay,
I'll let that.
are we good to keep moving? So we're done through the 6s. We're on a 7 done. Am I correct? Back on to somewhat of the agenda. All right, so action information items, there are none. I'm on to number 8, which is councillor inquiries, notice of motion. Does anyone have notices of motion they'd like to give, or any inquiries? Sorry.
That's okay, Mr. Chair. It wasn't on there, but there were a couple items that I just wanted to sort of signal to council that are upcoming, or whether there's an interest in incorporating those into the budget. So I think the first item that I just like to at least put out there is the River Route transit. By the end of February, council will need to determine whether they are interested in continuing with the River Route for another year, or if there's.
Will that be part of the operational budget? Or is that a capital item?
That will likely be incorporated in the operating portion of the budget.
So we will see it at the next.
You would, by the time we're at the operating budget, what you will see is a report with respect to the River Route transit coming forward at the February 13th administration and operation meeting. What I wanted to point out, at least, is at this particular point is up till now, our portion of operating that system has come from the modernization funding. There is the modernization funding. We have basically the remaining of that looking for the upgrades to the town hall. So that's something that will either need to find some other type of funding source, or potentially taxation. So I think it's just something to be aware of, where it was covered from modernization prior to. We will need to look at some other funding source.
Question, and help you with my ignorance on this. I know that gas tax funding, what we used to refer to as gas tax funding, I can't remember the acronym that it's now has.
CCBF.
What is it?
CCBF.
CCBF. And do you know what Canada
Yep.
build fund?
Community Building Canada Community Building Fund.
And it covers things like transit, not what it used to be like, where it only covered roads and bridges and stuff like that. It can be utilized for a much broader purpose, correct?
I believe that fund has been expanded, but I have to confirm on that exact detail on whether it could be utilized for an operational service.
Right, and that's where my question is, because it's operations versus capital.
That's correct.
Yeah,
As
my
opposed to
question.
capital.
Yeah.
End of it, so.
Yeah. And so I know the treasurer was right behind you, couldn't see him, he had his hand up.
Just regarding the operating, a question was asked earlier what the 2023 OMPF is.
Mhm.
So it's $674,300. That's what our municipality will get in
Six,
2023.
what was that again?
$674,300.
It's not last year's,
That's 2022 though.
that's last year's,
2023 OMPF allocation,
so no change.
Wow. So-
and no change.
oh,
I don't think that's right. I'm pretty sure we got a big happy email that said that we were getting an increase officially.
Couldn't have been that happy with an email.
I don't think,
This says 2023, so. Or look for 2023.
did you have further, sorry,
So since we opened the door on.
well, it's not discussion, it's, I don't think we're still in discussion, are we still, have we gone back to action and information items then, or back to?
Well, I was just,
Are we on-
I was just looking to sort of capture that just under a kind of six AA of a little bit of the discussion items.
Okay, so we're still on 6A.
They're just more for information purposes, because it will be a tight timeline with respect to the memorandum and that decision by the end of February. And the reason that the decision needs to be done by the end of February is to ensure that there's adequate time to put in the funding request for the provincial gas tax, which does actually cover the operation of some of the transit expense. So you need to know who's in, sort of who's out by that time.
So I can't ask questions.
I think you can, I think we said it was 6A still.
I may not have the answers at this time, but.
No, and it's, I was actually more looking for sort of more information on it, so, and it's not something I need to get now, because you wouldn't know it offhand anyways. But, prior to that discussion, and so I had some people mention it when I was campaigning, okay, but, it's really hard to gather what the true scope is, what the real market looks like, but, some people are saying, can I dispense or no, and things like that, so do we have an analysis at some point where we can discuss what options could exist for maybe even expanding that, and what, do we have any data to support whether it's worthwhile or not to do that, I think, and then, sort of that cost analysis of it would be nice to see in advance of that conversation.
Yeah, I think through the chair, I would suggest comfortably at this stage, you don't have enough data that would support an expansion of that route. And I think that if there was going to be sort of an expansion north, it would require most likely another bus in that sense. Because if you're making too big of a circuit, then you only have like one or two opportunities to catch it one way or the other. So like in that regard, but we certainly will have some updates with respect to the ridership numbers and the finances, and we'll try to provide as much information as we can to council in making that determination.
There are, to sort of maybe help the counselor, there are the past reports though, correct? That he can access
For
those to help him
there have been
advance
2 or
that
3 reports prior.
Yeah, because the actual river route discussion won't be till the 12th, I think you said, but we'll have a budget meeting.
12th
before then, right?
or 13th.
Yeah, we're gonna have a meeting before then for budget. So maybe discuss.
Yes,
that.
and it is, the focus will be more on capital at that next budget meeting as well, but I'm just wanting to signal that.
Yeah, okay, so before we move on from six, AA, does any, just,
Got one more.
there you go, on there, okay, there you go.
So at the last tri-council meeting held in October. There was some discussion around physician recruitment and whether there would be interest in the three municipalities sort of pulling together. I think the number around thrown out was about 7,000 a year thrown in by each municipality. So we'll say 20,000 a year for 4 years. What my question is, at least right now, is there at least interest in furthering that discussion, and should we put that amount in the operating budget for further discussion with members of council?
So
Yes, Mr. Chair.
I think I can, and quite possibly the deputy mayor might have sat in on some of that discussion at county's council in my absence. But I believe that Minister Clark has asked for, I think there was a thought that there would be a discussion at Roma about physician recruitment. But I think maybe now there's been a suggestion that we actually have a discussion at the United Counties level again for that. I see no harm in adding a small dollar value to the budget. If we don't spend it, it ends up going into reserves. I don't know what the will of council is by any stretch, but I don't know what the will of counties is to do it either. And they may end up, the upper tier may end up taking on that role. And I don't, I know that maybe we feel we need to do it as at the lower tier as well, but we're starting to really overlap. That search and that service, and I'm not sure that that's the best use of resources. So I'd really like to wait and see what the outcomes are of those discussions. I don't think there's any harm in including it in the budget. We can always take it out. That's my 2 cents.
And to that point, we can always put it into the budget and not spend it because we didn't need to, because things changed.
Right, sure. Better end.
So at least they can initial starting point, but you want that amount.
You said $7,000,
Sorry?
you said 7,000? For a
Uh,
year?
That was just a number sort of thrown in at that meeting. So as a concept of like subsidizing 80,000 a year for 4 years.
Just, and again, going back, but overlapping those dollar values. So if we're going to spend that money at United Counties, and then we're going to spend that again with Augusta and Prescott, and you're amping it up a little bit from what, you're paying it twice. And I'm not, from my standpoint, I'm not sure 100% that I really want to do that without knowing exactly what it's being used for and how it's being utilized, but generally speaking, to include it in a budget if we don't do anything at United Counties and we do know what and how it's going to be utilized, I'm all for having it.
Mr. Chair, I don't think that any of us would want to sort of do a duplication of those expenses, and if we need to have better coordination between all parties, then we may need to get that.
Yeah, it's going to be a competitive process for sure to get doctors, but we're going to see that all across Ontario. So, and I'm not sure that no matter how many $7,000 packages with doctors, it's going to help them make a choice over this township over Prince Edward County or Toronto. Their budgets are far bigger than ours. So, but let's keep it in.
To be fair though, as well, we could also use that money to see if we can help build a business case for why come to our town and someone else as well. So.
Yeah, 100%. Discussion for a different day.
I will stop my 6 AAs now, so.
Does anyone else have anything else to add? And I'll say it twice just because it makes sense with AA. Does anyone else have anything to add to 6 AA? We're good. Sorry, clerk, for making a mess of our meeting. Let's move on then to, as long as everybody's comfortable, moving on to action and information items. There are no action and information items, if I'm correct. Great, so let's go back then to counselors' inquiries and notices of motion. Does anyone have any inquiries or notices of motion? Counselor Ward.
I guess we'll call it a notice of motion. I saw recently in the various literature from Roma that zone 7, which is a zone we're inside of, but it's quite large as well. It's just roughly, it looks like it goes from Cornwall to Rock, anyways, and it's from the river to the next river, I think was the Reed River. And that's our zone, and there is no candidate right now on the Roma board who's put in for an election. So based on that, I had a bit of a chat with the clerk as well as with people at Roma as well. And because it's vacated right now, and they will be trying to come up with a process to put somebody in as a put somebody in there. And I reached out to understand the time commitment and et cetera. And now that I've had that conversation, I think I want to put forth my name for the appointment to the position of Zone 7 ward at the Zone 7 member for the board at Roma. So
I don't think you need to do anything at this level for that.
it was best just to mention that we talked.
Yeah, I know I had that discussion with the deputy mayor as well, so. Yeah, that's good. Zone 7 needs somebody to represent it, that's for sure. Cameron Wells did a fantastic job over the last, I think he was there for 2 terms, did a really good job, and his focus has definitely changed, but I know he enjoyed his time. Further inquiries and notices of movement? Anyone? No? All right. So 9 is mayor's report, and it's not really a mayor's report tonight, but I do have a small, it's not so small actually, but it'll be short. Item to add to this, and it's more of a learning experience for all of us around the council table. It's been a learning experience for myself. So they're going into detail because I can't, it's confidential. I do believe and I will rely upon the CAO to stop me if I am getting into muddy waters. So I do like to speak more than I should. So please don't hesitate. I recently had an informal code of conduct leveled against myself for my conduct in a certain situation, not necessarily a meeting. And through the informal process, myself, the complainant and the CAO met. We found an informal resolution to that process. Certainly some growth on my part. So I think what comes out of it, because I'm limited in what I can say and what I can't say, what I want my fellow folks around the table to understand, and all staff, is that at all times, we need to remember that we are, and you corrected us tonight, CAO, about using our titles, but at all times we are our title. And we need to make sure that when we're conducting ourselves, that we do so in a professional, courteous manner, which is fit of our individual offices. And so I didn't do that in one small circumstance, and I have made an apology for that. I wasn't required to say this tonight, but and I don't think it's typical coming out of an informal that's done, but I really felt compelled So in my heart, I didn't necessarily think that I'd done something completely wrong. But I wanted everyone to know that in all circumstances, no matter what conversation you're having, make sure that you're thinking the words you're using, the way that you're talking to people, it's the perception of the way those words are received, not necessarily the way you meant them. And I think that at all times we need to be aware of that. So if my experience can help anyone else around the table avoid such difficult experience, I hope that it can be used to grow this team and to make sure that it keeps others using professional conduct and professional way. Good. Okay. And no, I can't answer any questions, and that's all that I have to say. So number 10 is question period. Eric, are you going to ask any? No. I think you're here as staff, but so there's nobody on Zoom, so we're good there. We have no closed session. I need a mover for adjournment. Moved by Councillor Chris Ward, seconded by Deputy Mayor Steve Dillabaugh, non-debatable. All in favor? Good. Or adjourned. 9:59.